what you're able to hear a little bit of now are fireworks. Spring Festival is officially over. It is now the second day after Spring Festival, and lots of companies and businesses, having just returned to work, are celebrating the beginning of the new year, that is to say the year that begins after Spring Festival, by the traditional means of lighting off fireworks, allegedly, once upon a time at least, to frighten away the ghosts, those things that would inhibit success in the new year. But for most people, it's really just an excuse to make a lot of noise. And what you can't do right now is smell how thick the air is with recreational ordnance. And what you cannot see right now is the ground littered with the detritus of recreational ordnance. And it raises a number of questions. Here's one of them. There are actually laws on the books in this city, as in most Chinese cities, about the permissibility of lighting off fireworks inside the urban area. The law, however, is very tolerant when it comes to things like Spring Festival, Lantern Festival, weddings. When a couple moves into a new apartment, they'll often light off quite a few fireworks, again, traditionally to scare away the ghosts or things that would inhibit good luck and happiness and prosperity and all that sort of thing. And what bears noting also is the fact that the reason why the laws are on the books is because every year around this time there are scores of injuries, particularly to young children. Oftentimes parents will relent and they'll let the child light the fuse. Now, I didn't this year go around to the emergency room, but had I done so, what you would have found are just people queuing up, suffering burns, scalds. Oftentimes people get their hair singed by being too close. You might have been able to catch a little bit of it just a moment ago. These are detonating, or rather they're actually, you know, reaching fulfillment, as it were, just around the 17th floor. I'm on the 17th floor right now. But yet, you know, it's tolerated because culturally it's very important to the Chinese people. And of course we need to remember at all times, although we have a one-party state and what people would qualify as an authoritarian government, the leaders of China are themselves Chinese. They're not aliens from the planet dictator. And so they completely understand that this is a risk worth taking, and that's the key point. It is a risk worth taking. It is clearly foreseeable that every year houses will be damaged. This very apartment complex had a fire just outside the balcony of the place where I'm staying now, and the fire department had to come and put it out. Cars are going to be injured, awnings are going to be burned, in some cases entire buildings are going to go up in flames, and people are going to be hurt. There's no way around it. This is tethered quite tightly to traditional values, and even though there are laws on the books, laws that exist for the interest of public safety and public welfare, and even though the main casualties are often children and those who are just simply irresponsible and, you know, aren't making enough of an effort to do this sort of thing, that is to say light off fireworks as safely as they can, it's tolerated. It is an acceptable it is in other words an acceptable casualty in the effort to preserve something that is culturally very, very important. And, you know, if the World Health Organization or, you know, international human rights groups wanted to 批评中国人 for having this very clearly, manifestly dangerous cultural folkway, China would tell them to stuff it. They would say that this is a Chinese affair. It's not your business, it isn't anybody's business but the Chinese. And if we choose to accept these casualties, if we choose to know that every year like clockwork, our emergency rooms are going to be filled with people who've been injured by fireworks, well, that's our problem and not yours. Now, I hope that the analogy with gun control is apparent and I don't need to spend too much time fleshing it out. It's not a very strong analogy, I admit, and with limited time, yeah, very limited time, I'm not going to attempt to flesh it out in all the detail that I think it deserves, or at least to which it is entitled. But the gun control issue is an American issue. It isn't a British issue, it isn't a French issue, it isn't a global issue, and while we welcome data from other countries, you know, this is all interesting, you know, heuristically and analogically with respect to best practice and best policies. The fact is the American people are not the peoples of France, they're not the peoples of the UK. And there is no transcendent capital R reason that dictates what we must do in the interest of so-called public safety or so-called public health. And I think we need to learn a little bit something from the Chinese here. They have their folkways, they have their values, and they're going to go ahead and they're going to pursue their ends with the means that are appropriate to them. Now, I think there's no question that the Second Amendment, what makes it important, what makes it valuable, what makes it worth treasuring, what makes it, you know, so worthy of protection at all costs, is incomparably more important than the, you know, folk way of lighting off fireworks to welcome the new year, or to scare away non-existent ghosts, or to participate, you know, in a legacy of N hundred years, or, you know, 4,000 years, or, you know, however many years it is that the Chinese in question wants to credit their culture with longevity. So, again, people who are, you know, left of center on this issue, on this gun control issue, people who would self-describe as restrictivists, either, you know, moderate restrictivist or, you know, radical restrictivist, meaning eliminativist, that is to say, eliminating to core all civilian access to all kinds of firearms for whatever reason. You need to bear in mind a few things. Number one, whatever everybody tells you about what works in Japan, or works in the UK, or works in France, there are reasons why they work in those countries, and those might not be applicable to what we do in the US. Just as the Chinese diaspora in the United States simply wouldn't be allowed to detonate this much recreational ordnance inside of an urban area like this one. Okay, this is, you know, this is pretty dense. Number two, we have the Second Amendment for a very, very good reason. And I think it would be absolute folly to say that it's a historical redundancy, it's reached its best-by date. But if we do want to have that discussion as to whether or not we should be proud of the Second Amendment, or whether or not we should relegate it to the scrap bin of bad ideas, we can have that discussion. But until we do, until we have reached some good consensus, some well-informed consensus, what we simply cannot do is undermine its efficacy in the short term. We simply cannot do that. That will be challenged and it will be fought, and let's hope the fighting over this issue remains more or less civil. And I prophesy that it is not going to remain civil, particularly if some people in Washington and, you know, some of the governors in our cities and local legislators remain naive, intransigent, and deaf to the echoes of history. Okay, so this is RationalHoplite live. Well, not live if you're watching this, it's recorded. Talk to you from China. 如果我有中国的朋友们在看这个节目，新年好，新年快乐，祝你幸福，祝你健康，发财。OK， RationalHoplite，再见。